I've heard from so many protective parents, court is a game. They don't give a shit for the child. They don't give a damn if they remove a child from a protective mum or from a protective parent until she's 18. A judge will destroy the evidence. Politicians just cannot get involved. The media won't get involved.
If the press lets people know that this should be investigated, then it will be. But the press falls down. The press is now the top cover-upper for elite pedophiles.
So one grandmum wrote to me, and she writes, Australia has a dirty little secret. Children today are being sexually abused behind the secrecy of family law, child protection, and the family court systems. Welcome to video 4, and I'm going to be rushing through these videos as I feel there's a kind of urgency to get these videos out there. And I just get contacted by so many protective parents, and today I'm particularly sad for what is happening. And just to reflect on a comment from video 3, a woman from the UK wrote, this is my story. Please, God, help us. How do we stop this? How do we fight this? It's just the same story. There's this huge repeating of patterns all the time. I feel vulnerable doing these videos. I never wanted to do them. I actually, around March 2019, over a year ago, I wanted to handball this all over to the mainstream media or to these well-paid hosts that have their TV shows. And I was in discussions with The Age. The mum flew up from Adelaide on this particular story that we were pushing, and they cancelled the meeting. I asked, what's the problem? The answer came back that, Victorian readers won't really be interested in a story from South Australia. And I said, well, that's no problem. I've got 3 similar or identical stories in Victoria that would probably sell just as many papers as George Pell would. But they just went dark. Just not interested. And so why don't we hear these stories? There are many reasons, but one reason is Section 121, and that is in the Family Law Act. It prohibits people talking about the details of these cases for the protection and privacy of the child. Section 121 seems to be there to protect the criminality and malfeasance of those acting in the wrong interests of the child. And today I'm going to go through the cycle of collection through the courts, all the tricks of using the courts, the police and the child protection departments to remove children from good parents. So I'm going to discuss the cycle of child protection, and that's why I've named it the cycle of child collection. There are many ways in which this process can work. It can work through various courts, the family court or the child protection courts. Police may or may not be involved. The child protection may or may not be involved. But in many of these cases, it all lands up at the bottom with the child protection departments getting possession of the child and putting the children in out-of-home care, which aligns with their budgets. And of course, there are some children that go missing. But let's discuss the first scenario. There's a family unit and there's been a report of sexual abuse. Children have either come to the mum or to the grandmum or to someone and spoken about getting hurt in some way. One of the first things that the abuser will do out of the pedophile handbook is go straight to the family court and file for custody in the family court. So inevitably the child protection services, whichever department in whichever state that may be, get involved. The police may get involved, and there might be an investigation, and the outcome could very well be that the child protection departments have substantiated the abuse. I will just go through a very quick précis of a specific case where I believe this is Queensland, where the Child Protection Department substantiated abuse over 2 years. And the Child Protection Departments deemed the mother to be a safe parent, and the mother was acting protectively. But the offender continued to gaslight and turned the mother and maternal grandmother into the perpetrators, and then began colluding with police. Enter a corrupt female detective sergeant. Now, I've heard this many times, and she dismissed the child safety substantiation reports. And in another case, a female officer that I know of concealed her police interview. So the father's history of violence is ignored and perjury is accepted in the courts. The case had been before the Magellan court with supporting information from a pediatrician and a clinical psychologist, and they had all said there were very strong indications that the child had been abused. I'm not familiar with Queensland, but it was sneakily taken out of the Magellan process and put back in family court, where the abuse was then set aside. During the trial, it suddenly revealed that the recording equipment had failed in the child's interview. Whoa, whoopee, we've heard this so many times, and it's either concealed or, oh, I'm sorry, the recording, you're just going to have to rely on the notes. Then the beautiful trick turns around and it says the mother's emotional stability should be examined. They implicate the mother and even implicate the grandmother in abuse. So the child is removed from the mum until she's 18 years old. This first scenario is a process where there's sexual abuse, it's been substantiated, officer comes in, corrupts the family court are not an investigative body, and the departments and the police don't inform the judge of the family court. It goes against the protective parent and the children are removed from the protective parent. So I'm going to go through another scenario. So in this scenario, there's the family unit, there's abuse, child protection services, the police get involved, and so it's dragged into the family court. So some of the abuse may be accepted, some of the abuse may be kept out. But there's a custody battle, and the family court determine that actually the protective mother is the right parent to be looking after the child. This is not the outcome that was desired, and the protective parent has essentially won. But then something else can happen. The child protection departments need to be brought back into the picture for the offender to win. So the child gets hurt in some way to bring in the child protection departments. They then march in and remove the child to investigate the assault. They stop investigating the child. And so the protective mother that reported an injury or an assault or another physical abuse is now under investigation, not the abuser. It's this incredible twist of logic where the abuser is not being investigated. It's the protector that's being investigated. With the corrupt police officer concealing the abuse, not putting it forward to the court, the protective mother becomes the psychological or emotional abuser. And I discussed emotional abuse in the last episode. And in this case, as I said, possession is 9/10 of the law. The child protection departments now have possession of the child. So there's a further stage to this scenario, and that is round 3. And the child protection departments now have ownership of these children, let's say, and the protective parent and the children are being supervised 1 hour a week or 1 hour every 2 weeks. And they will then decide, well, let's reunify the child or the children back with the abusive parent. Because we haven't investigated this abuse, there's no problem, and they reunify the child or children back with the abuser through some reunification court. So what the family court decided in this instance, they've just turned upside down and done exactly the opposite, relitigated on all the same evidence. And this is done through Section 69ZK of the Family Law Act that can override the family law because it's child protection. So on the basis of one corrupt social worker, for example, you can turn someone's life around and you can destroy a child's relationship with her protective mum or protective dad. So let me go through what I call the beautiful trick, and that is how the courts and how the evidence gets removed from the court process. Let's go back to our scenario where the protective parent reports sexual abuse. The police may or may not be involved, and because it's before the family court or because it's before a court, the investigation is dropped, and the excuse is we can't investigate because it's before the court. And in this case, the children get removed from the protective parent, and when the protective parent challenges it with new evidence, they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't accept this new evidence because it's before the court." But the evidence is not put to the court. And then there's this terrible twist at the end of this, is that the court finally gives the children to the department and not to the protective parent, because there's no evidence of abuse. And how many times have I heard the police stopped investigating, they lost the recording, and they concealed the tape of the sexual abuse. And so it never got to the court. So the court's deciding in a vacuum, has to blame someone. So it blames it on the protective parent, and it's particularly well designed. So that brings me to the next section, which is the legal plant. And that is, it seems like in many cases that I've heard, that the solicitor or the barrister that's working for the protective parent is actually not. They're actually working for the other side. And I've heard so many stories where the protective parent gets encouraged to use a particular solicitor or barrister or whatever. And at the hearing, they come out of the starting blocks firing up for the protective parent. And then when it comes to trial, they just fizzle and they completely drop the case. And there's this beautiful example where a protective parent was self-representing in court and is battling through the system, and there's a solicitor sitting in the back all on his own. Suddenly, no one's ever helped this mum for years on end. Suddenly this guy is sitting there. He comes out of court and he says, "Oh, I can clean this up for you." He does. In magistrate's court, he cleans up on this particular case. But then the appeal goes to the Supreme Court, and now the corrupt solicitor doesn't inform the protective parent what's going on and makes a deal behind her back that completely sells her down the river. He even fired himself when he was caught out. It's just unbelievable. The corruption is beyond one's imagination. The process is there to decimate the protective parent. Anyone challenging the system or exposing what's actually going on has to be decimated. And the child protection departments have got all the money in the world, your money, taxpayers' money in the world, to get crown solicitors and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight the protective parent, to win. And I've heard from so many protective parents, court is a game. They don't give a shit for the child. They don't give a damn if they remove a child from a protective mum or from a protective parent until she's 18. A judge will destroy the evidence. I mean, it's almost inconceivable that our judges can do this.
If the press lets people know that this should be investigated, then it will be.
Yep, the whole gang seem to be enabling this pedophile activity to go on. And I stress again, I'm talking about these extreme cases that are so goddamn obvious that it beggars belief that upstanding members of society can actually push aside evidence of child rape, the most horrific abuses, and do nothing. So let me conclude today with, again, the email that I got. Australia has a dirty secret. Children today are being sexually abused behind the secrecy of family law, child protection, and the court systems. And when I first started, I said, oh my God, this is a mistake. No, it's not. The system is designed to protect, what do we call it? An industry? I don't know. God, please help us. How do we stop this? How do we fight this? And this is what we've got to do. Knowledge is power. And Section 121 has been concealing the criminality and malfeasance of those protecting the pedophile industry, or whatever they do to children. So I will see you next time.